Howdy friends and neighbors, I'm Brian Hilligoss and welcome back to our program, or welcome for the first time if you're just joining us, to a series of podcasts and interviews that I did with the great Lloyd Wells back in 2019. As many of you may know, Lloyd Wells was the musical director for Opryland USA, the home of American music, theme park / show park that was open for 25 years from 1972 to 1997. Lloyd also has lots of tales and stories and anecdotes from his past that he's sharing with us in this series of interviews. And we're going to pick it up in this episode where I ask Lloyd about some time he may have spent with Homer and Jethro and Peggy Lee and his time in New York City. By the way, the musical piece and recording that has been playing since we began this episode and playing underneath while I've been jabbering over the top of it was a wonderful recording from the CD Poor Butterfly. Features Mundell Lowe, Lloyd Wells, and Jim Ferguson on bass. And that particular song was My Shining Star by Arlen and Mercer. And as always, there's more information about this recording in the comments or description wherever you found this podcast on the internet, and it will take you to some place credible where you can listen to all of it in its entirety. And here we go. So Lloyd, I may have this wrong, but did you say you worked with Homer and Jethro back in the day, maybe when you were with Ernie?
I did, but it was not with Ernie. The fact is, they were opening for Peggy Lee, and I was working for Peggy Lee.
Oh, that's right.
And so I got to spend some time with them. We did 3 or 4 weeks in Hollywood, Florida, or at the Diplomat Hotel, I believe. And I hung out with them two guys every day. You know, with nothing to do during the day. We'd play the show at night, and we played a lot together and ate a lot together and told a bunch of jokes that you can't tell here.
What'd you think of Jethro's mandolin playing?
He played the hell out of the mandolin, there's no question.
A good friend of mine in Chicago, Don Sternberg, who is a world-class mandolin player and was a student. He was a student of Jethro's and traveled with him for a lot of years, and he has some pretty good stories to tell.
I'll tell you this about Jethro. This is a good one, and it's clean.
Okay.
What's more, it's clean. Garrison Keillor came to town. Mm-hmm. This is years and years and years ago. And we went to see him, and Louise and I did. And Chet was he had Chet on his show. And Chet came out and played a few tunes. And then Chet brought Jethro out. And Jethro had been sick. And he didn't play any, but he came out, pulled a stool out in front of the audience and told a few stories. Some of them clean, some of them not. But he just cracked the place up.
Yeah.
It just had him in the aisle laughing, just sitting there on that stool. And after the thing was over with, this was years after I had worked with them in Florida.
Right.
I hadn't seen him since. So after it was over with, I walked down to the stage while Chet was putting his stuff up, and I says, Chet, where's Jethro? He says, he's out in the truck out and back, sitting out there. Go out there and find him. So we walked out to the truck, and he was sitting there, and had the window rolled up, and I tapped on the window and had him rolled down. And he looked at me, and he didn't know me. And I told him, I said, Jethro, my name is Lloyd Wells, and I work with you, blah, blah, blah. And when you opened for Peggy Lee, and he says, oh, Lloyd, I remember that. And he says, here's how I remember it.
Oh, God.
He says, when the call came for us to open for Peggy Lee, Homer took the call. And he said, they want us to open for Peggy Lee. And he says, I thought it was kidding. They were kidding. He says, tell them we'll do it for double scale. and said, just like that, they took it. So we played that gig for double scale, and he says, that's how I can.
And how did you connect with Peggy Lee?
Monday, he had, for one series of concerts, one season, maybe, or 2 seasons, he had taken her show book that she normally did and had written, and it was written for a full band with strings. Mm-hmm. And that's an acre of musicians, you know. Mm-hmm. And her husband originally, I can't think of his name right now, I will, but he was a guitar player. Mm. That's why she had such an affinity for guitar players. Mm. And had written 4 guitar parts to go along with those arrangements. So at the concert, you had a string section, a bunch of violins and all that, brass, trombones, trumpets, French horn, all that, 4 guitars, you know, playing parts just like saxophones. It was wonderful to play. Well, he had played it for about a year, and then he called up one day and says, I'm coming to he'd already moved to California. He said, I'm coming to New York to play for Peggy for a couple of weeks, but then she's going to Florida for 3-4 weeks. I can't go. Do you want to go? And I said, absolutely. So that's the way I got to go.
Do you recall about when that was?
Well, Lauren had just been born, or was just going to be born, so 68, 60, around there. And it was about 3 or 4 weeks. It was a nice extended thing then.
Wow. Did you get any sense of what Peggy was like?
Yeah, I did. She was a good gal. She treated us all. And she was another one that appreciated her musicians, man. Every one of them. Every night before we went, all the musicians would go up to her room, sit around and talk, if you wanted to have something to eat or whatever, all that type of thing. Yeah. She had a big suite, of course. And then you'd file out the door. And she would stand at the door and kiss each one of you on the cheek as you went out. Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Mm-hmm. At the end of the gig, she gave everybody a cigarette lighter with Peggy Lee written across it. She got to me and she says, Lord, I gave out of cigarette lighters.
Oh, really? You didn't get one?
She says, I swear I'll have you one made. And I said, I trust you. It never came.
You never?
Never got. Everybody else got one now. What would I give for that now? You know.
Wow, that would be a great keepsake. I want to skip now and kind of go back to your time in New York City. Now, this would have been before Peggy Lee and before Homer and Jethro or Opryland or any of those things. So when did you actually get to New York City?
June of '64 until we lost track of it, but it's sometime around March or April of '73. Don't know exactly what month it was. We just lost.
That's a long time.
The date, you know.
And while you were there, were you primarily working Broadway show pits?
Monday got me to the first Broadway show I had was The Yearling, and Monday called up and says, I got you a chance for 2 Broadway shows, not just one, but you get your choice. The Yearling or what is that thing with Sweet Charity? Sweet Charity. And I chose The Yearling, and it ran, we rehearsed it, and it ran for about 3 days, and Sweet Charity ran for 2 years, you know, so I blew that. But from then on, I pretty much had a Broadway show from then on for the rest of the tenure in New York. I did Cabaret for 2 years and 11 months. Wow. I did Company for 2 years. Other things, Zorba, Two Gentlemen of Verona, Georgie, La Strada, Different Times. I can't remember. I think it was 18 shows all total.
I just happen to have the list here. Skyscraper, Superman. I actually was in Superman when I was in college. Golden Rainbow, The Selling of the President. And you were contractor and bandleader for The Heathen, and on the original cast album of Berlin to Broadway. So what was that like coming from Laurel, Mississippi, and being in New York City, the Great White Way? Or did you think of it in that context?
I didn't really think of the Broadway thing before going up there. I knew about Broadway and about Broadway pits and all that, but I didn't really think about working in them. I went up there to do recording and TV and whatever else I could get into, you know. which I did a good bit of, man. Did all of Sesame Street and Electric Company.
And all that being in addition to Sesame Street and Electric Company, as you said, but also Merv Griffin and Ed Sullivan, Johnny Carson, Sketch Henderson, and you did some movie soundtracks, Dick Cavett's TV special, I think Lucille Ball TV special. So a lot of stuff. So what was it like doing the Electric Company in Sesame Street? I had no idea.
The chair was Jim Mitchell. There's a picture of Jim in there somewhere. A good friend of mine who came from in the Midwest. Big, tall guy, was a good player. And he and I had been playing club dates around New York. I'd been seeing him around. And he had several accounts. He had the Kraft Music Hall and some other things, some other television things that were good. And Sesame Street got started, and he was the original guitar player on that. There wasn't about 6 guys. Joe Raposa, Danny Epstein, Eddie Shaughnessy, the drummer. You know who I'm talking about?
Right. From the Tonight Show.
Bobby Cranshaw, Bobby McCoy. Anyway, he, of course, sometimes needed a sub. He needed to go do something else, and he called me to sub. So it got to where he was out of town a lot. He had a lot of good gigs, the way it was. And so I was in there a good bit and was offered that position. I said, well, it's Jim's show, ask him. And Danny Epstein, who was the contractor, asked him. And he didn't want to turn loose of it, which was fine with me because I was working a lot for him, you know. But we did those and did the Electric Company, those things. Jim did that for 27 years. He played that show. He finally moved down to somewhere around Baltimore or something and would commute back up there to do those shows. But he did it for 27 years. Broadway, I was on stage in Zorba, was an on-stage musician. Paid a little more, you know, got excited about that, and I would come on stage during the intermission, about halfway the intermission, come up with some little circular stairs with a bouzouki. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And I would play my version of Greek music, my Jones County, Mississippi version of Greek music for a few minutes. I put the spotlight on me, and it would take us into the second act. Anyway, I had a good time doing that. The rest of the time, we were sitting in the pit playing guitar and banjo, a lot of banjo, you know, tenor banjo.
Yeah.
And in cabaret, I even played a little lap steel, very little, because that's how much I played. You know.
I think you even told me once that you found some collard greens, didn't you? Some like in the village.
Called the Pink Kettle or something like that, and gracious alive, it was just soul food, man. And I worked at the Theater de Lys down there, and I would go by that place every night, man, and it smelled so good. And I'd go in and get a bowl of collard greens, but he would always serve me just a little small cup of them. You know? And I asked him several times, I said, man, give me a big bowl of collard greens. No, can't do that, man.
So how did you end up leaving New York and getting back to the South?
Louise is a Mississippian too, and we had the 2 kids. We had moved we lived in Manhattan for 6 years, and then we moved out to Jersey, right across the George Washington Bridge, bought an old house out there, and it was suburban, just like living here, you know. And but we both, all that studio work that I wanted to do so badly, all the television stuff had just started to go away. It no longer existed. There were no more staff bands, you know. Mm-hmm. And it got down to where almost the only thing you could do and make a living at was play a Broadway pit. And I did not, although it was exciting and it was such an education for me to sit in that pit for dang near 10 years and listen to the ensemble of a pit orchestra that was not able to get the 27 men in it. It wasn't big enough,
right,
that were required in there. So you operated with fewer men than you ever really needed, and to see how the arrangers and orchestrators and all use those men and got the big sound and all that, and that's in my brain, man. That's the way I think is that sound. I'm not a full symphony orchestra buff. You know, I love it and all, but that's the sound I like. A few strings, few woodwinds, a little brass, rhythm type thing, you know, in a confined setting. That's why it worked so well for me out at Opryland, is because we never really had the only time I had a big orchestra out there was for the Easter show.
Oh, I see.
You know, I had a 21-piece orchestra. Everything else, the largest we ever had was 16 pieces, 14, 12, 16s, that type of thing. So it served me well, man, having been in New York for all those years, to come straight to Opryland and write for those ensembles.
Here's to the girls who stay smart. Aren't they a gas? Rushing to their classes in...
And that's Elaine Stritch in the original soundtrack for Company, which Lloyd was one of the orchestra members. You can find that on YouTube. I'm sure Lloyd enjoyed his time with Hal Prince and Stephen Sondheim, little as that time may have been, but what a great experience for him. I'm going to close out this episode of our 2019 interviews with Lloyd Wells with one of the selections from his Invitation CD, which is solo guitar, and this would be his Rodgers and Hammerstein medley. And again, this will just be an excerpt, so please look in the comments and the description of this so you can listen to more of his fine music. I'm Brian Hilligoss. Thank you for joining me.